Well, can I ask all of you actually whether this I mean, I think probably the basic truth is, you have a big national day and there they are up on the balcony and, people on the Mall are getting a bit teary, singing Land of Hope and Glory, and none of us are really quite able to explain our national relationship with the monarchy, and often I think people don't think about it for most of the time. You've obviously had to think about it. Claire, maybe I can start with you. Did your view of the two of them as individuals and the institution change at all through this?
Well, I mean, hugely, because I'd never considered them as human beings at all. I think you just sort of, obviously they're not, aliens.
That's the first exclusive of tonight.
But I just don't think you do. I think it's like anyone that you want to put on a pedestal. You don't want to think about them having problems, because then, what does it mean about your own life? Like, you just don't want to have to think about it. You don't want to have to think about people having... the point is that this is why the programme works, is that we all are dealing with all the problems that they're dealing with all the time. And it's a leveller. Do you know what I mean? It means that we're all the same. And I think that's a very interesting thing to kind of think about all the time. And that, that it's very important to remember the essence of people and kind of... I think with them as a couple, I'll never know her. She's an enigma and no one will ever know her, because that is the nature of the job and that's the beauty of her as a person. And so, I know Peter Morgan's Queen, I don't know the Queen. But Philip and Elizabeth...
You mean they're not the same?
I don't think so.
Right.
You'd have to ask him that. But, Philip and Elizabeth, I think their story is a story of a marriage and of that they are the institution, but they're not the institution, and that's what I think the dilemma was. So that's the one dilemma that I really, really understood, was the idea that he looks at her not just her decisions as queen. He sees as her decisions as wife, and she's going, no, it's not. Why can't you understand that they're two different, and it's two people looking at a role that she sees as out of herself and he sees her as it, and she doesn't see herself as it, and that's the big problem and them in their relationship in this story. And I found that incredibly really easy to understand, and I just think it's something that at the time, at that period of history, and everything was completely, out of the ordinary, and I think they just really love each other, and it's sort of a beautiful, complicated, mad love story, really.
But she understands the difference between the public face and the private face, and in some ways he wants her to be the private person in some ways.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's the tension, which is so interesting.
So rich for a drama. It endlessly gives that, isn't it?
Did you find your view of them as a couple, or of the institution, changing at all in the course of this? I mean, presumably you've thought about it more than you ever have in your lives before.
Definitely. I think it is really complicated, and I think that she is very serious about duty and also serious about her faith, and those are things that are very real to her, and that's, setting aside the reality of the situation, that is very fruitful territory for drama. You know?
But I felt that, for watching it, I don't know how you all felt, but I felt for a lot of it, I felt very sympathetic to her. And then by the end, with the whole business about Margaret, but presumably as you go through the series, you will play this both ways, because that's the reality of the job.
But I think Margaret is such an interesting story in that way, that in some ways she has to call it not for herself and not for her relationship with Margaret as a sister, but she has to call it as she sees it, for the greater good of the monarchy and for the greater good of the country. And so that feels like the first really destructive or divisive or complicated challenge in some ways of her reign, having to make that decision.
Well, I'm going to ask you to pick up in 2 seconds, Suzanne, but just before we get to this is another clip which picks up on some of what we're talking about, the difference between, or the tension between being a queen and being a wife. This is the conversation just before the coronation, when they're discussing whether he's going to kneel to her. Sure, we've all had those conversations.
Yeah, we definitely.
Every day.
Constantly.
Well done. Now, Suzanne, I'm going to ask you a tricky question, because there's a bit later where he says, perhaps you'd like to kneel before me.
In episode 7, I know that.
Well, the interesting thing is there's no sex in this, but it's quite sexy in parts. And one of the things I think it's very...
Is it?
Maybe I need to get out more. I'll stay in more. Yeah. Anyway, let's not digress. Very well. But I mean, one of the reasons that this works so well is it's a full flesh and blood, maybe no, bedroom scenes, but in a sense, I mean, that's a bit tricky, but you went there wholeheartedly.
Yes.
Matt Smith.
Matt Smith went there wholeheartedly.
Matt is so fantastic. He brings such charm and charisma and a hint and a whiff of danger, and you sort of imagine, you know exactly why Elizabeth loves him, and that. But do you mean why?
I if I'd been the executive producer of that show, I'd have been quite nervous at that moment.
No, I thought it was fantastic, actually. I remember the conversations vividly. And Peter can be mischievous and challenging, and weirdly, actually, can be quite coy as well. There are certain areas, territories he doesn't really like going too far into, because he really does take you into dark places of the soul. But sort of sex and risque, he's quite modest about it, actually. And that, I remember him suggesting it, and we just thought, yes, partly because actually at that moment in the season, in the series, it felt like we needed a bit of brevity, a bit of lightness, and a bit of something that just sort of, it'd been quite a profound episode, that one, with Churchill having the stroke. And we always said, in a way, this was the episode where the Queen grew the most. It was a big lesson in that one episode where she suddenly had to take on Churchill. She had to really defy those around her and stand up for herself. Having started out at the beginning of the episode, she was very unconfident and feeling that she was ill-educated and she couldn't really stand up to the statespeople she meets daily, weekly, and actually by the end of the episode she'd done it. She'd actually done it, and so therefore we just needed that little thing. I don't know.
Claire, was this a no-brainer for you? You'd obviously played a queen before to great acclaim in Wolf Hall, which was also very, very good indeed. Was it completely, a no-brainer? Did you read the scripts and thought they were particularly good? At what point did you think that absolutely I've got to do this?
I don't really know. I never felt like there was a moment where I had to make a decision. I know that sounds really silly, but I've never really had meetings like it where I really felt like an equal. I really felt like, even from the first, and it really took me aback. I just didn't take it seriously because of it. Because the first meeting I had was with all these guys, and it was really just like a chat and a kind of read it and see what you think, and oh, why don't you come back in and do it again? And I was a bit like, they're being awfully casual about it. And I just was like, I mean, also I was 5 months pregnant, so everything was taken with ever so slight, a small pinch of salt. And so when I was offered it, it felt so easy, and you get so used to not fighting for things, but you sort of have to convince people a lot of the time to employ you. And I never felt like you ever made me feel like I had anything to prove, or that I wasn't kind of up to it. And so I never really felt like there was a moment where I had to make the decision, I suppose.
And some actors really want to read around a part massively and go and read lots of books, and some are just happy to read the scripts and say, I've got it from the scripts. Which
the lazy ones.
No. Did I say that?
I just took it off the page. I just took it off the page. Just means I didn't have time.
Yeah. I'm being very polite. But, did you take it off? I mean, what was your own approach to kind of, this is a big thing to sit down and do, stand up and do even?
Well, I mean, very luckily for me, I think I took the approach early on that I couldn't really, I didn't want to fight Peter Morgan about the character. I didn't want to come in with a book and go, well, actually, on page 348 of this book, it said that she didn't do that. Because I just thought, I think he knows what he's doing. And also, I think it was quite reassuring to me to imagine her as not Elizabeth II and just imagine her as Elizabeth, Mountbatten, as Peter's queen. Because it gave me a security blanket of going, I'm not actually being her. So I could sort of convince myself of that, which was quite nice. But I mean, I did, you have to. I think you have to do tons, and we had a really amazing kind of support network of people. We had researchers, and we had like weeks and weeks and weeks of rehearsal and getting everything right and getting all the wigs exactly right and all the costumes exactly right. And not so much exactly right as in getting it precise in a sort of really patronising way, but making it look like it wasn't just me in a wig with some clothes on, but looked like a person, like a fully fledged individual. And I think that's why you go along with the characters, because you're not patronised as the audience. There's not someone doing an completely impersonation of the Queen and the royal family. We're trying to inhabit them. Anyway, sorry, I'm going on.
No, it's good. Keep going.
But yeah, you just do as much as humanly possible. And I think that the most important things for me were the voice and the movement and everything like that. And we had an incredible voice coach, William Conacher, who actually you could not make a programme like this without. And I just sort of, I don't know, and then you have to turn up on the day. And I think it's really interesting, actually, when you realise the cast that they've put together. Nina Gold cast it, and Robert Stern. And we're all of a very similar mentality, which is that on the day, we just want to let it all go and not think about it and actually do the scene. And that's not always the case. But we're all very, very similar in the fact that we want to make it truthful, and we want to believe it ourselves. And so we would always be doing scenes, and it just be kind of, you were there in the moment and not going, oh, I've got to move my foot, or oh, I've got to speak in a funny way, or anything like that. It just all felt real.
What do you think we want from the monarchy in the round? So it's a very big question, but it's in a way, this is a study of it, isn't it? It's a study of our strange relationship with this institution, which, let's be honest, the Queen, when they write the Queen's obits, what they'll say, I think, is that she managed to maintain the monarchy bang at the centre of national life throughout her reign, which was not a given, I think.
No, I think also I would say, just sorry to jump in, but one of the things I would say is that you really see during the show, and I really started to appreciate with her, is the cumulative effect of moving through Prime Minister after Prime Minister. And she starts with Churchill, and she's a very
love that bit about them all standing up. I mean, I had no idea that was the.
And then Eden comes in, and then Eden goes, and then Macmillan comes in, and Macmillan goes, and actually,
and David Cameron goes. They're all taken out on stretchers, and she just stays
and she
there.
just keeps going. And in a way, there's a sort of cumulative wisdom and sort of.
And you also felt it. You sort of felt it intuitively at post-Brexit, that there she was, just sort of quietly, where everything else was flailing and panicking and desperately unsettled and questioning
but also
who we
just
are.
Building up experience in a way, actually having insight into these situations that these politicians come and go, but actually that
There's
she
steadiness.
What did you think, Claire? Did you spend any time thinking about that and about our national relationship with them and what it is all about, what it means, what it is that we actually want from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is that what we maybe don't necessarily think about so much is that it is there is a transaction going on between us and them, and it's not just one way. Yes. They are entirely dependent on our opinion of who they are, and that's what's so fascinating, I think, is, especially in the last kind of 30, 40 years, is how much it's changed in just hugely from when she came to the throne. And she's constantly, and they've constantly had to navigate that, and they've made mistakes and they've had successes, but they're constantly going, oh, they think this now, they think that, they think this, they think that. They always look at press clippings. It's a machine. She is at the head of it, but it is a machine, and it is something that is of public service, and so therefore they are accountable and should be kind of criticised and all those sorts of things. And I think it's a really interesting thing that we sort of separate them from ourselves, but they're sort of the embodiment of us. We make them that by our behaviour, which I think is we dictate who they are in a weird way as a symbol of our country.
There's a debate, I guess, about exactly, no one really quite knows what the Queen said to Margaret at this time and what the decision-making was, and Peter obviously has taken a view about that. But Claire, can I start with you? I mean, you've spent a long time inside Peter's Queen's head, as you've said. Do you think she made the right decision? This is public against personal in the... I mean, if you, not as you as Claire, but if you were her, I mean, in so much as you got into her head, do you understand why she made that decision, or do you think... Because the Queen would be the first to acknowledge she hasn't got everything right.
No, I think, weirdly, it's so interesting, because me and Vanessa had an interview together where, for the first time, we both talked about... I mean, in sort of classic Margaret and Elizabeth way, I talked about what I felt about Margaret, and then she went, "Why have you never thought of it like?" She was like, "I never even thought that you thought that." I was like, "Of course you haven't, because you're Margaret." But that from kind of her point of view, Elizabeth's faith is the most important thing to her. And imagine being in a circumstance where you are told and you believe fully that you are God's sort of person on the earth, and you are there as an example of what it means to be a good Christian. And therefore, when it comes down to it, if she had gone against what she at the time and what the Church of England said at the time was the way that you were a good Christian and what you believed in, it would have been the end of her, it would have been the end of the monarchy, it would have been the end. Forget the abdication. That would have been it. I think what's really interesting about it is the difference in those two women's characters. And ultimately, Margaret would always be all right. She's in this story anyway, she's very unstable and very insecure, but she has a strength and a self-belief that Elizabeth doesn't necessarily have. If the situation was switched and she hadn't been allowed to marry Philip, I don't think she would have. That's it. I don't think she would have moved on. She wouldn't have married anyone else. She would have been, But Margaret was always going to be all right because she's tough. And I just think it's so interesting watching two sisters have to deal with this, and how much you wonder, did Margaret cling on because she really was getting at her sister, and how much did Elizabeth really dig her heels in because she was getting at her sister? There's no way of knowing, and we'll never know. All I do know is that it would have been an incredibly difficult and awful position to be put in, to be the person who has to make the decision. I think in those sorts of circumstances, it's much, much easier, weirdly, to be the person receiving the news rather than the person giving it. Because, absolutely bonkers.
Can you imagine the pressure that put on?
Margaret says, "I'm bigger than my title." True or false? Well, there is this suggestion that actually Margaret didn't want to give it all up, and that she could have done if she'd really wanted.
I think that's what we felt in our bones.
Well, listen, we need to leave some time for questions, so can I just ask you to just throw forward to the next series? You're filming now, you're all looking...
Well, Margaret is happily
exhausted.
with Tony Armstrong-Jones.
Yeah. Thank
Cut
God.
to.
That's quieter on set. I'm pleased about that.
Yeah. No. We can't say anything.
No.
You can't say anything. Oh, well, this is going to be a very short conversation.
Season 2 is well, we pick up almost where we left off. Suez.
End of 1956.
Eden.
Eden Suez crisis, and it finishes.
Laugh a minute.
Suez
crisis.
Suez crisis, and finishes with
short, at least.
Macmillan's resignation, 1963. Right. Yeah, so it's 56 to 63.
And it feels it has a different flavour, and it feels like the 60s are with us, and it's got a slight shock of the new, and I hope it's got a slightly
definitely the first season happened in a bubble, and I think that Elizabeth and Philip and Margaret are all in a world, and everybody is in some ways supportive of them. And I think in the second season the world comes crashing in, and I think that and I have to deal with all of that.
Yeah, and I think I hope in many ways part of the integrity of what we're doing is that Peter had mapped out season 2 way before we started filming season 1, and had written most of season 2 by the time we were filming season 1. So nothing has been adjusted to sort of retrofit or in a cynical way, or it's there with its own integrity, with its own love, with its own kind of huge amount of research and obsession and passion.
It's a disgraceful amount of talent, doesn't it? It's really exceptionally annoying for the rest of us, but never mind. He's 6 series. You've suggested that he may have mapped out in his head very roughly.
We sort of feel like we're climbing or running one marathon at a time, or climbing one mountain at a time, and if you say you've got another 4 to go, you just clap. You can't do it. So I think he's slightly like that, and we the producers, the team around him have to kind of, because he wants to write it all himself, which is, I think, brilliant and such an exceptional thing to do, and with it that brings its own challenges and burdens and complications, and you really have to manage that. And you think, well, every now and again these things come along in life, and they're an endeavour. They cut above everything and you just want to be able to support that, and that's how I feel. But with it comes it's massive. It's like going into the boxing ring. You just have to, So if we're going to do it, we've got to do it well.
Well, keep doing it, because it's great.
When are they going to aid you or substitute you?
No.
I'm substituted, that's it. I'm on the bench. I mean, not I'm on the bench, I'm just in a different team. I'm just on my own. I'm just unemployed. We're gone. I mean, we always knew, that's not a shock. We always knew. And when we signed up to it, and also, not to be funny, but it's also a real plus, As an actor, there's nothing worse than kind of the sound of 7 years. I'm sure to some people it sounds amazing, but to us it's like 7 years of playing the same person, and this is a tough job. It's a good 9-monther, and that's a lot of your life that you sign over to it. So I will miss it so much, and we all will, and we've all love each other so much, it's just sort of sickening. So we're all going to miss it terribly, but I just can't wait to see where it goes. I just can't wait. I just think it's amazing. My favourite scene with Matt Smith was never in the programme, unfortunately. That was our wedding night.
Oh,
and that's all I'll say.
Carry on.
No. That's all I'll say. But yeah, no, it was absolutely hilarious for all the wrong reasons.